Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7. So, wrapping up Forces of Destiny Season 2 with Disarming Lesson and Triplecross. Well, Disarming Lesson has to do with Ahsoka and Ezra, and it takes place early on in the series because Ezra still has his combination blaster slash lightsaber, and Ahsoka Tano is here as Fulcrum, and of course this has to happen before the end of Season 2, Twilight of the Apprentice, because of course she disappears for a while, so we're talking about between the finale of Season 1 and the finale of Season 2. Anyway, so Ezra is walking around with his lightsaber, and Ahsoka says, "Oh, does that thing make you feel powerful?" And he's like, "Yeah." And so she actually disassembles it, takes the kyber crystal out of it, and tosses it away, and says, "Do you feel powerful now?" And he's like, "What are you doing?" And then she puts her lightsabers on and starts attacking him. And he's like, "No, I don't feel powerful." And then he has to sink down into the Force to realize that he doesn't necessarily need the lightsaber, at least to be able to evade her attacks. And so she's teaching him an interesting lesson and doing it in a rather scary way. This is a little bit different look for Ahsoka, I guess, in a way, because she's being very kind of mysterious about it. Like, "Oh, are you defenseless?" Or he was saying, like, "I'm defenseless." And she's like, "Are you?" And, stuff like that. So it's kind of a different, more mischievous, and I won't say darker exactly, but, just not as angelic side of Ahsoka as we've seen before. And I thought this was also rather interesting for the fact that, as far as I knew and as I had ever recalled, when you set a kyber crystal on a lightsaber, I thought that was a pretty delicate operation. Like, it was only because of the fact that you had to be a well-trained Padawan and very skillful at manipulating the Force very carefully, very, delicately, very minutely, that you would be able to put a kyber crystal in place. And so, number one, Ahsoka just casually flicking the kyber crystal out of Ezra's lightsaber was rather shocking. And also Ezra then being able to go boink and put it back in very quickly into his lightsaber, so that way at one of the last seconds of Ahsoka's strikes, he could get his lightsaber back up and block the strike. It was a very interesting episode in that way. And so I'm wondering if it's supposed to be meant to have us rethink the whole kyber crystal thing and how they work, because that was a lot simpler and treated a lot more simply in terms of disassembling and reassembling it, and so casually, comparatively speaking, than anything that I would have expected. So that was an unusual episode in my estimation, at least. And then Triplecross was released actually the same day as Solo: A Star Wars Story, and features our first Solo: A Star Wars Story character, meaning Qi'ra specifically. And not only that, but IG-88 appears, and old Clone Wars / Rebels friend Hondo Ohnaka appears in this one as well. And in all honesty, I'm a little bummed. I was hoping Emilia Clarke would be doing the voice of Qi'ra in this one. Not that Olivia Hack does a bad job by any stretch. She's perfectly fine as Qi'ra, but, Felicity Jones stepped in for the first couple of Jyn Erso ones, and Daisy Ridley has done the Rey ones, and so I was hoping, but not the case. Anyway, so the gist of this episode is that IG-88 is pursuing Qi'ra because a Crimson Dawn lieutenant will fetch quite a bounty, and it turns out that IG-88 and Hondo Ohnaka have teamed up to capture her, and Qi'ra basically is able to use her sharp wits to turn Hondo and IG-88 against each other. She says, IG-88's bounty is bigger than the one on me, and Hondo says, "Well, my bounty is bigger than the two of you put together." And IG-88 says, "Really?" And I wish that it had been, interrogative, "Really?" from IG-88, because he does that sometimes. He states what kind of statement he's going to make before he states it. And so Honda ends up shooting IG-88 and putting stun cuffs on him. And while Hondo's distracted, Qi'ra gets out of the stun cuffs that Hondo's put on her and ends up getting the drop on Hondo and ends up capturing the both of them. So all's well that ends well, and now Qi'ra has both Hondo and IG-88 in her custody. It's very interesting to see what might happen with those two, because, Hondo obviously gets loose at a later time since he shows up in Star Wars Rebels, and this obviously happens, well, maybe not wholly obviously, but I think we're given the implication that this happens before Star Wars Rebels, so I don't know. It'll be interesting to see where exactly this fits in the timeline because we don't really have a clear picture of it. Though this also happens to take place on Ord Mantell. Once again, we have another episode of Forces of Destiny this season happening there. And it might also be taking place in almost the exact same location as Bounty Hunted took place in, because we see some of the same sort of market stalls with awnings and whatnot. And we also see, just very briefly at the very beginning of the episode, off in the right hand side, in fact, I'll put a screenshot up here, two characters off to the lower right foreground where that could be Score and Jackson, or characters that look like Score and Jackson that we talked about in Bounty Hunted in the 6th episode from Forces of Destiny. Score, of course, being the bounty hunter that Han Solo ran into on Ord Mantell in Legends now, because it hasn't been recanonized, and Jackson, of course, the giant green rabbit. And he has been recanonized, but he hasn't appeared in anything other than Star Wars Adventures, I believe, if I'm not wholly mistaken, at least not officially, and still not confirmed as being Jackson, but certainly looks like someone at least from his rabbit humanoid species. And that is going to do it for our talk about Forces of Destiny. All the episodes, we've covered them all now, from episode 1 through episode 16 of season 2. And as far as today goes, over on the audio version at sw7x7.com/iTunes, we'll do Last Jedi trivia, so do check that out. For now, though, it just remains for me to say thank you so much for watching, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.